hopefully.
Great. Well, no, it's a pleasure to come. I didn't hesitate to say yes when Van asked me, because I think when I first got involved at the DRI, we had some issues, as I'm sure lots of hospitals that you work in have had issues, between the sterilisation units and the theatres, should we say. We had some significant problems, and I decided, right, I'm going to just volunteer myself to try and find out where we're going wrong here. I couldn't see that it was one person's fault, one side's fault. It's like all these things, it's multifactorial. And the first thing that was completely noticeable was this totally daunting issue that I didn't even know where Synergy was based in my hospital. Synergy had never met me, I'd never met them, and we're faced with a situation like this and think, where do you start? It's such an impossible task. It's very easy to, and we're very quick to moan and complain in theatres when something doesn't go right or wrong. So, as I've said before to lots of people, if you want to stop a juggernaut, you can't stand in front of it. You've got to get inside the system and find out how it works. And that's where our relations became a bit better, and we tried to find out where we were going wrong. So I started, and I first met Adrian, the big cheese, and I was convinced he was Darth Vader. The Grand Fromage was Darth Vader, and he was the enemy. And I just thought, you know, your company is making my life miserable. And I was, in fact, Luke Skywalker. And I thought, I'm here to save the day. And the relationship proved to be totally true, because after he learned what I was and I learned what he was, I realised he was my dad. and actually, we're both on the same team, trying to achieve the same goal, but just didn't realise he was my dad, because he's a very old age. He looks young, but he's very old. And so, what I'm going to do today, this isn't a litany of all the things that have gone wrong in my practice over the last few years, because we've been here for months, but I'm going to try and highlight a few areas of where we have had issues between that interface of the clinicians and the sterilisation units like yourself, Synergy. And I must stress right now that this is not me saying Synergy's got everything wrong in my hospital and all the problems I'm about to highlight is all to do with Synergy. They're problems that have happened for whatever reason, responsibility being sometimes our fault, sometimes Synergy's fault, whatever, but have ended up with the clinical care of the patients being compromised. So you hear about facts and figures and targets and the bottom line, and we need to make this much money this year and this whatever. Well, I'm going to tell you, irrespective of all that, how it affects me, and without giving you the names of these patients, what happened as a result of this to Mrs. Bloggs and Mr. Smith and what have you. So it sort of personalises some of these issues on a clinical level, which hopefully you'll then be able to take away and hang your hat on these problems and say, well, in the future, if we have issues like this and that, I don't want to end up being the person responsible for making Mrs. Smith's life miserable. So this is not meant to be a case of this is what you did, this is what you did. It's just to highlight from a clinical perspective, when things go wrong, it can sometimes affect the end user, if you like, and that's the patient. All right? So some of the areas we're going to talk about today, very briefly, and I stress they're anecdotal. So I've got no great sheaves of data here, and there's no text on all these slides apart from these headings here. It's all pictures, because I'm an orthopaedic surgeon. Drape defects, failure to return things, misplaced items, labelling issues, when we know things are missing, and communication issues. Okay, so they're all sort of part and parcel the same thing, but they all have specific areas of concern and specific ways to deal with these things. So this is probably one of the most common causes in theatre for us now of delaying cases, cancelling cases, or not having the right kit. We, as an expanding unit, there's now 26 orthopaedic consultants, or 27 at the DRI now, or the Royal Derby Hospital as it's now called. And with that expanding number, and the more niche experts you get in any one hospital, everybody diverts and does their own little thing. So we're using more and more kits now coming from manufacturers, more and more loan kits that are coming in, and we're relying on, they come in packed and we send them down to Synergy for sterilisation, they come back in there, drapes and what have you. And you can guess which ones belong to us. You know, this is one of our trays, and these are sort of loan kits, all very nicely packaged and what have you. But the difference is they inevitably come now from the manufacturers with these steel trays, which are great in terms of everything has a place and a place for everything. But the corners are they're supposed to be rounded, but they're still notoriously sharp. Now, we spent a fortune in the hospital, believe it or not, on an ergonomist who came into our storeroom to say, oh, right, this is how you should store things, this is how you should catalogue things, this is how you're going to find things easy. And after spending 5 figures on getting this fantastic expert, we end up, there's Vince. Vince is about 6 foot tall, and up here, look, there's the big heavy hip trays. Super, isn't it? So you can imagine poor old Bev, she's about this big, and she's come out of Synergy or whatever, having picked up a load of instruments. She's got to hoik it up here. And what happens is you stick it on these shelves, and you push them on there, and any corners that catch, any of these little rivets or whatever, they just put holes in. And half the time the holes are tiny. And I've just lost count of the time I've been in theatre now. They're obviously all double wrapped, you know that. But you're in theatres and you look at the outside hole and you hear the dreaded, there's a hole, and you think, oh crikey. So you take off the top layer, there's another hole, and you think, oh, now what do I do? And a lot of the time, I hark back to what I said earlier, we're using kit and equipment now because we're getting so specialised that has come in. We only have one set of it. And then you're in that impossible dilemma. What do? Do I send it back? Do I re-sterilise it? Have I got the luxury to change the list order around? Do I cancel? Do I go on? Because it's a tin tray, so it's going to be fine. You know, there is no answer. I don't know what the solution is. But we're seeing a lot of this now. And we would be very happy if we could sort of combine this problem of having dreadful trays like trays like that, which are ours, but they're all plastic and very lightweight. If we could organise them a bit more, or get plastic trays like that with organised slots and what have you, we need a compromise somewhere. I don't know, that's not for us to decide, that's a manufacturer's issue, I don't know where that's going to go. But it does mean, and again, if I could impress upon you and your staff, when you're draping the metal trays, it's often the trolleys that are escorting these trays from your part of the hospital to where I work. They're often the culprits, because people load these things on by the dozen, and as they're heaved off at the other end, it's these cheap trolleys, and it's often not the shelving, it's often not the theatres, it's the Mayo type trolley things that they get heaved on. So, drapes. Here's a salutary tale, and this is again an example which, for no other reason, it highlights some of the financial implications about what can happen here. This is a young lady who is just 40 odd, who had this hip replacement done, and I won't bore you with the technicalities, but it's a metal on metal articulation. It's not done very well. There are some concerns about metal on metal articulations at the moment, and it needs revision. So it's referred to me to take it out and change it. Now, what I want to draw your attention to here is the fact this socket is very close to the inner rim of the pelvis here. Okay, you can see that it's almost touching. Now, that's her post-op film, where we've managed to take that out and put this new socket in with a bit of bone graft, and we've preserved completely this inner wall without breaching it or without, you know, shoving it through. Now, how do you do that? Well, you do it with a special bit of equipment, a piece of equipment we don't have in the hospital. It's called X-plant. And it's basically this big dome thing here, which you pre-size, which fits exactly into the socket, and it's got this mega sharp blade here, which is a bone cutting blade, and you just spin it around. And because it's such a close fit, you can take situations like that and extract the socket with virtually no bone loss. And obviously for a young person that's great, because you want to put bone back, you don't want to take any more away. So 40-year-old, big operation, revision procedure, it's going to take 3 hours to do everything else. You book it, you order the kit costs money, you book the time off and let everyone know about it. The kit comes into the hospital the day before, because we make sure it's on time. Somebody says, oh fantastic, X-plant's here. I was about to do a case where I needed that, so I'll use it anyway. So they use it on day 1. I've booked it for day 2. They ring me up and say, I've got X-plant, you don't mind if I use it? No, not a problem, but can you just make sure it all gets turned around for tomorrow morning? Not a problem. So everyone's aware that I need it for the following morning, 9 o'clock. Following morning, for whatever reason, and I'm not saying it, in this instance it was our fault or your fault or whoever, but for whatever reason, the following morning, it's not ready. I haven't got it. So I've got a diabetic who's starved, sitting in receiving, waiting for a big operation, who's psyched up to the nines, and I haven't got X-plant. And there's nothing I can do to do this operation, other than say, where is it? It's been located, it's still dirty, it's not even clean, let alone sterilised, so we've got a 3-hour delay. So I'm standing there with an anaesthetist, with a whole team of theatres, with nothing to do, because of essentially a failure to return on time the stuff that was sent down the night before, for whatever reason, okay? And we'll talk about why that might be later. Now, does any of you know roughly how much theatre time costs? You probably may know more than my juniors do. Anyone got a figure? So how much do you think a theatre costs per minute to run? It's £30 a minute. So 10 minutes delay, you've racked up 300 quid. Half an hour's delay, you've racked up the best part of 1,000 quid. So your average theatre list over 3 hours or so, 3 to 4 hours, you're talking about 8,000 quid. So me standing around not having that one piece of kit for this lady for that 3 to 4 hour period, before we've even started, has just cost us 8,000 quid. So never mind the fine that Synergy might get for not sending it back, or the angst of the patient, or the fact that she's diabetic and starved and her blood sugars are doing everything else, and the fact that I had to cancel my clinic in the afternoon because the anaesthetist was kind enough to say, yeah, we'll do it in the afternoon, and I'll cancel my clinic. You know, do you see how there becomes a knock-on effect here? So Mrs. Bloggs ultimately had a fine operation. She's happy as Larry, but she's soon in hospital because of the delay. And my blood pressure was up before it even started because she's angry and shouting at me because we haven't even started yet. The anaesthetist going, I've got the kids to pick up from school at 3 o'clock. Can you be finished at 3 if we start at 12? Do you see what I mean? So it just has a knock-on effect. And that kind of knock-on effect will never be translated into your dirty washing room or into your clean area or into your sterilisation area. It just doesn't translate back to you. That's not your fault. It's because you're not exposed to it. But from where I'm standing, these delays, that's exactly what happens, and it results in an unhappy experience for the patient, and it's the patient who ultimately defines what we do and determines what we can do, and when they're not happy they complain, and when they complain it all gets knocked back. So again, so the purpose of this talk today is not to lay blame on anybody, it's just to highlight from my perspective when things go wrong, this is how they go wrong, and sometimes how badly. She's happy now. Hallelujah. Misplaced items, and again I bring you back to this. When I started this project and this fact-finding mission, I had no idea what is asked of your staff. So I went down to our Synergy unit in the hospital, and I asked to be shown on the whole process, the whole journey from A to B, and I just think it's amazing that we can send down something like that, a complete and utter mess, and it always comes back 99 times out of 100 with the right amount of kit on. I don't know how you do it, quite frankly, because look at it. I mean, how could someone who's never been exposed to this kind of instrumentation or whatever, they're expected, they get this tray and they think, all right, well there's 21 things on it, and there's something called a mayo there, and there's something called a whatever, and you think, I know, fair play to your staff. This kind of stuff is easier, because everything is place for everything. When you've got slots and little pictures, a lot of the manufacturers put on now, things to put in, it's fine. But we're still left with lots of trays like this, where it's just, quite frankly, a mess. And it's very easy to not know what's on there, or to find extra bits or whatever. And frequently, there should be 20 things on there, and you've got 21. Those are the ones which I think are probably the biggest problems, because the people cleaning the instruments may think, well, at least it's all there, so it doesn't matter. So there's nothing missing there, but actually the extra bit is clearly come from somewhere else. So those are the trays that I think do more damage than the ones that have got 19 instruments and they should have 20, because at least the alarm bells ring and that tray can then be quarantined and someone can make a phone call and say, what should we do here? And we did find a big drawer full of spare instruments. We went down, there was a cupboard full of them. Now, you need to have some kind of mechanism, and this is part of the problem, which we'll talk about later. You've got to have a proper interface between the theatre staff, surgeons, whoever, and yourselves to identify when there's bits missing or there's bits extra. It needs to be expeditious, it needs to be traceable, the theatres need to be accountable for who's doing what here. And you might say, well, that's part of the process, that does happen. Well, you know what, maybe our hospital's bad, but it doesn't happen. We've got some better processes in place now which are going to improve on that, but it doesn't. But I absolutely put my hands up and say, fair play to you guys, because trying to keep us happy with trays that look like that, it can't be easy. Labelling issues. Okay, so this is another, she's a headmistress. I was scared of her the first day I met her. And even though I think she's younger than me, but I felt intimidated anyway. So you can see she's got a terrible hip here. So this hip's okay, this hip's terrible arthritis. And I need you to understand some technical jargon here. So she needs a hip replacement, and I decided to give her a young person's articulation of a ceramic nature. Okay, now these are all ceramic articulations. Now, for the non-colourblind members of the audience, you can see some are pink and some are yellow. And this ceramic stuff, this granite if you like, comes in different forms. And this is older alumina type ceramic, and this is the new stuff, which is Biolux, Delta ceramic as it's called. Now, again, to cut a long story short, the Venus de Milo has got no arms because she's made of marble, and you know there's these fine fault lines in marble which make it look pretty on your kitchen work surfaces, but they are literally fault lines. And if you were to put a chisel in one of those fault lines, it shatters. So ceramic doesn't wear out in a nice, progressive, predictable fashion. When it wears out, it shatters catastrophically and pretty much immediately. And so we've developed new forms of it over the years to make the particle size more uniform in order to prevent some of these catastrophic failures. And we are told, and I don't know whether this is manufacturers protecting their own behinds or whether it's the science in it, but you're not supposed to mix and match. And you can kind of understand why, really. But it wouldn't be a good idea to put pink into yellow or yellow into pink, because they're not supposed to be. Because you're changing the bearing design and how it's performing. So let's go back to Mrs. Headmistress. So I'm planning on doing this ceramic on ceramic operation, i.e. a ceramic ball in a ceramic socket, because she's very young. I want it to last a long time, and being only 40 odd, there's a distinct possibility that she might require a revision, a redo in the future. Now this is a standard set of trays just for the socket part of the operation, which you may not be familiar with. So this is one of the manufacturers who make one of these ceramic implants, and there are 4 trays for that, just for the socket. So these are the reamers to ream the socket, to ream the bone out in the pelvis. These are the trials, so you ream out a hemisphere in the socket, in the actual pelvis. You plonk one of these trials in and say, yeah, that fits quite nicely. That's the instrumentation you use to put the trial into the hole, and that tray under there has got little drills and screw sets to put screws into the casing, if you like, if it needs a bit more support. So there's 4 trays just to get the socket in. Now, we have 2 of these sets in the hospital, and they're ours. Now, for whatever reason, that tray and that tray on that day were labelled the same. So somebody in another theatre who did one of these cases had what they thought were the 4 different bits, but because the trays had been labelled wrong, they actually opened 2 of those, one of those, and they didn't have that one. So that's fine. So they sent for the other one, and it was duly opened, and Bobby's uncle. Now, it just so happened that because it was the screw set, that's the one that I personally rarely open, because you very rarely need to put screws in these sockets. So when I came to do my case, I was expecting to do this operation here, which is a metal shell with a ceramic insert, ceramic head, and an extra stem, which is a cemented stem. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, because in the very young, ironically, if you expect a revision, if you think you might have to do a redo, this is all modular. It all comes apart. You can dislocate the hip 20 years down the line, you can flick the head off, take the liner out, you can tap that stem out, change it all, put it back within all the cement mantles, and it's Bob's your uncle. So it's all modular, it all works very well. So I'm halfway through the case, thinking I've got a full complement of kit here, but unbeknownst to me, it's because it was mislabelled in the other theatre, I haven't got a full complement of trays. And it's only when I've reamed the socket out with the reaming set open, I realised that actually the trial set isn't there. It's already been opened next door. So there was a communication issue which someone should have picked that up next door and thought, crikey, Arthur's case is going to be scuppered here. Didn't happen, theatre fault, but the labelling fault was from downstairs in your department. Either way, I'm actually in theatre with the hip open, with a 40-year-old who wants a hip replacement, who's had a long discussion. You can imagine she's quite informed, came in with a sheaf of documents from Google that big. I said, what are you going to give me, mister? And we had a very long discussion about what we were going to do. And I suddenly found myself in a situation thinking, crikey, what am I going to do? Because I can't do what I've set out to do. Now, she's still got a ceramic articulation. Now, they look a bit different, and you might say, well, so what? She's got a hip replacement. It's the same ceramic as this, so she got the articulation she wanted, but what's the big deal? Well, I had to completely change the system. I couldn't put this stem in because you can't mix and match the heads and the sockets, as I've explained. So I had to go for a completely different system where I had a complete set of inventory for this, and the instruments to put it in. So why is that different? Well, this is uncemented. And she will grow onto that all the way down here. It's got a coating on this stem, which means it will get bony on growth all the way down that stem, all the way down there. And to say that's going to stick like glue is the understatement of the year. That is now part of her femur. And if for whatever reason I needed to change that, for whatever reason, were she to get infected, were to dislocate or whatever, that ain't coming out unless I completely destroy her proximal femur from there to there. Now here's hoping she's going to be fine, and this slide's now about a year or plus down the line. She's completely fine. But you can see if this one has a problem, I can tap it out, literally with one tap, the whole thing comes out, I can do what I have to do, put it back down, and Bob's your uncle. That stem in this person, for me, was the wrong choice. Clinically and functionally, she's completely fine. She's none the wiser, she's skipping around, she's back at school, doing everything quite, no problems. But as a revision surgeon, my plan B, were there to be a problem with this lady, was scuppered completely by one label on one tray. And it puts your blood pressure up when you're in theatre. And if she was a non-verbal Alzheimer's communicator of 85, you could think, well, you know, it's probably going to be okay. This is a woman who's 40, completely active, and has a distinct chance of requiring a redo at some point in her life, because she's got, hopefully, another 40 years to go. And my plan B is now scuppered because of a one label on one tray. So that's not a big deal. She's still got her operation, but for me, that will always be in the back of my mind, and in her notes, were I to do anything wrong here, should we have done something different? I don't know. And this is part of the problem. This is the paperwork that's just stuck. This is after one case, one primary case. This is not a complicated operation, but this is some of the paperwork that's left on the side of their theatres of checks and whatever on these trays. On average, there's about between 9 and 11 trays knocking around at the end of a case for a simple primary arthroplasty, a simple primary hip or knee replacement. There's all these trays knocking around here, and they've all got their own labels. And because of that, these all have to be checked by somebody. They're all sent back down with the trays for you checking there. It's a chain of events and a paper trail, which is, when it all works, is great. But one of those bits of sheets gets mislaid or whatever, and another label gets stuck on it. And I openly admit your process in your cleaning areas is far more robust than our checking process. We just sign the bottom of these bits of papers. You have to log yourself in, barcode yourself in, and you've got accountability and traceability. We still get it wrong, both sides. So I fully accept that your side of the fence is probably more robust than our side of the fence, but it doesn't matter, because sometimes we get it wrong for whatever reason, and this is what happens. Now, known missing items. This just comes, I'm afraid, with experience, and I don't know how we get around this one. This is just a very simple example. This is called a Charnley bow, for those of you who don't know. And what it is, it's basically better than an SHO or a registrar. It's a second pair of hands that doesn't answer you back, doesn't ask stupid questions, and that's what it does. There's one limb of it, and there's the other limb there. So this is a little hip wound, so this is the size of wound I use for a hip replacement. So it's a bit of a small hole and a deep, dark hole, which he or she can't see standing on the other side of the fence there. But this little fella here is just so simple. Charnley invented it 60 years ago, and it's just basically a hook attached to this bar, which is springy. So you hook it onto either side of the wound, and depending on whether you put that little knurled knob there on that hole, determines how far you want to crank it open. It's just so simple. It'll never change because it works, it's effective, and it's great. Now you can see how there's a curve on that, and that particular curve on the Charnley bow is about that wide. Now we do have deep-handled Charnley bows for the more Rubenesque patient. So when you're ploughing through acres of custard, you can ask for the deep-bladed Charnley bows. Now there's the three instruments, and they would come in a pack like that. So you can imagine that sometimes it's a bit distressing when the pack comes back like that, with two bits in, because you now know that that as a construct is useless. If there's only one of these hook type things here, you can't use it. So at some point, somebody has sent down on a tray as an extra the deep bladed Charnley bow with just 2 bits. And it's been processed as 2 bits. And it's been repackaged as 2 bits, sterilised as 2 bits and sent back as 2 bits. When actually it is functionless as 2 bits, because you need the 3rd bit. And without it, it doesn't work. So when something is missing, we need to identify that something's missing, and then we need to sort of quarantine it. It needs to come out of the circulation, it needs to get out of the circulation so that it's rectified, because it's not helpful, believe it or not, to send something back like that, or it's not helpful from our point of view to send you something with a bit missing, which I'm sure we frequently do, because it's functionless. So actually, none is better than 2 out of 3. Because if I haven't got it, I haven't got it. But there's absolutely no point sending that back. And that's where I don't know how we make this part of the process more robust. And you can throw these ideas amongst yourselves. But when you've got someone who's very inexperienced cleaning the stuff, if they're cleaning a little single box as an extra item with those bits on, if they don't know what that looks like, if they don't know that there's 3 bits to it, they'll quite happily clean it, scrub it, take the macroscopic stuff off it and then go through the washing system, and they think, oh, I've done a good job today. How do we do that? Do we have to put photos up of every single piece of kit, of every single extra item? I don't know. Personally, I think we need to cross-fertilise our talents more, and we need to be sending our nurses down to Synergy more often, and you need to be sending your staff into theatres more often, particularly the new staff, to see what's happening, to see how many trays get open, to see the chaos of a straightforward operation, which looks like chaos to an observer, where there's trays everywhere. It's organised chaos, I promise you. But we need to just enter into each other's environments a little bit, just to see what's going on and the ramifications of what happens when it doesn't go right. Because my eyes have been opened. And this is perhaps where we might go in the future. We may end up getting these custom jigs. This is a plastic cutting jig. So I was chatting about earlier. We might. This is possibly the future in that for hip and knee replacements, we might be sending off MRI scans, because we're already doing it for specific cases. But it might be the routine to send off MRI scans to factories currently in the States, who actually manufacture patient-specific jigs. So you get an MRI scan of your distal femur or your tibia or whatever, and they make something that is absolutely unique for you out of plastic, basically. They send it back in a box with Mrs. Bloggs' name on. So you open the knee, this is for a knee replacement, you open the knee, it can only fit on the femur in one position because it's like a glove. And you put a pin in there, and saw where it says saw here. And that's it, it's operation over. And when you're finished, you just throw it in the bin. So it's disposable, and it reduces the trays for a standard knee replacement with the exact same implants from 6 trays to 2 trays. So you do a knee replacement with 2 trays and a custom fitted jig, and it takes 20 minutes off the operation time. So if you do 2 knee replacements in the morning, and you did them both with this system, you'd actually have another 40 minutes to do your 3rd one at the end of it. So the extra 200 quid you've spent per jig on that actually pales into insignificance when you've generated another 5,000 quid worth of income from your 3rd knee replacement. Happy days when we can get rid of all of them, just chuck them in the bin. And that's possibly where we might be going in the future. But there we go. But I think this really, I've left it to the end, but this has got to be where most of the problems arise. And it certainly was the case in our hospital, where the nursing staff are very quick to blame the sterilisation units and vice versa. So when you literally open a pack in theatre as a end user, if there's something not there or it's whatever, the default answer is, oh, Synergy have cocked it up again. But if someone in theatre has not packed it properly, or if they've not sent it down to you in the correct state, then it's our problem. Now we need to have a means where communication is absolutely paramount. Now this is kind of, our nurses are pretty set in their ways. And I just left these 3 earlier on this morning, and trying to tell them new ways of communicating with each other, and trying to tell them to embrace new technology and use, dare I say, emails. That's quite avant-garde in our hospital. It's a nightmare. You know, they must start to adopt the Australian principle. This is when I was on my fellowship. This is a swimming net in a beach. Enclosure not shark proof. You know, swimming at your peril basically. And we need to be that blunt. So when something's missing, we cannot have on the theatre side a reporting mechanism which is different from the sterilisation units side. So we had a system where our nurses was filling in a report form for problems, missing bits, extra bits, which was different from Synergy's report form, which is ludicrous. You know, we've got to start talking the same common language. You know, it's like the two Irish hunters in the jungle, and one of them drops down lying motionless. So his mate Seamus picks up the phone to 999 and says, Picora, I've been hunting in the jungle, and Seamus, he's on the floor, he's lying motionless. And the 999 operator says, well, hang on, calm down, let's just confirm he's dead. There's a pause on the line, they hear a shotgun, now what do I do? You know, we've got to start communicating specifically and properly with each other in terms of what we want to do with the kits that are missing. Now, my own personal mission, which may not be Synergy's or the hospitals, but I feel that anything that is wrong with a kit or a piece of instrumentation should be quarantined in your department, so we can't use it. If I haven't got it, I can't use it, and I can't blame anybody but myself if it's not there. So if our pre-op checks are robust to say, Arthur wants to do a hip replacement, therefore he needs this tray, this tray, this tray, and this tray. Now if it's not there, that should be identified before I get anywhere near the patient with a knife. Which means if there's something wrong with the tray, in clean washing, dirty washing, or whatever, it needs to be quarantined and immediately fed back to theatres. That ain't coming back to you. As opposed to coming back with the label on the top, with that list of long things, we're saying, all present and correct apart from instrument X, which is currently, or was, our default position. Because that, I think, is the worst of both worlds. If you're cleaning stuff, and there's a bit missing, to identify it's missing and sign a bit of paper and stick it on the top of the pack, all sterilised, and send it back to theatres. Well, you've done your job, absolutely. You've done it, you've cleaned it, you've identified there's something missing. But if it's not registering at our end, you're exposing the end user to potential problems. So I personally feel that Synergy's job and our job are not mutually exclusive. You are not just a cleaning agency. And we need to work together to actually make operations happen. So yes, you can clean instruments, yes, you can pack them and make them sterile, but if they're not fit for purpose, they need to be withdrawn. So they might be beautifully clean and packed nicely, but if they're not fit for purpose, they need to be withdrawn, because I can't do my job then. And if I can't do my job properly, we have headmistresses and other revisions and all sorts of patients here, which I've only shown you 1 or 2 cases today, but of patients where I think their clinical care has been compromised to a fashion which is unacceptable and avoidable through lack of communication. So I just need to urge you that if we were a business in industry and had a 98% success rate in manufacturing raw plugs, and we only got rid of 2 raw plugs in every 100, you know, we'd probably get an award for being fantastic. But I put it to you, that is not good enough in the business that we're in. If we can't be 100% accurate with our sterilisation process and with the actual packaging, cleaning and repackaging back to us, then it's not good enough. Because if we're 1% off the mark, that means one case, one patient potentially in every 100 is being exposed to a problem, which for the majority of times you get by because you just use X or Y. We might have duplicates, but more often than not we're using kit and equipment, as I explained earlier, which is unique. We only have 1 set of this, or if we're lucky 2. But if the other set's not available or it's missing, we can't do what we want to set out to do, and that becomes a problem. And when you're doing the amount of work that we are doing today in these big general hospitals, we do 2,500 joint replacements a year, so you just do the maths. That's 20 odd cases or whatever who potentially could be affected, which I don't think really is acceptable. And that's not a criticism of Synergy, it's just a statement of fact. We've got to try and aim to be 100% accurate in every case, to deliver what I need to do every time. Because if we can't, patients suffer. And that's really the take-home message. So the people in this room here are probably the most important people in your respective hospitals, as far as I'm concerned. because without you people doing what you do well, I can't do my job, as I've just demonstrated. And that's why I think it's hugely important to try and interface better with your equivalents in the hospitals and get them up into theatres and get your surgeons down into your cleaning units to say, look, this is what we do. How can you expect us to do X, Y and Z when you've got no idea the pressures you're putting us under? Your turnaround times are unrealistic when you're sending trays down in a mess. Your turnaround times are unrealistic when you're sending them down at 5 o'clock and want them back at 8 o'clock with bits missing here, bits missing there. You know, we need to know that. And you have to have reporting systems in place which are robust enough to have traceability and accountability, which is why I think electronic communication systems like an email from a theatre to your offices and vice versa are infinitely more favourable than a paper trail, because with an email, for instance, you get a time and a date and a user name sent from X or Y, and it's instant. These things take time, but we, since started this process, we have had a marked improvement in the problems we've had. We've got a lot better at it. Our relationships are far better than they were, and there's no longer that he said, she said, therefore our fault. You've just got to engage with the opposite sides of the fence. It's very simple, very straightforward, but it does work. This is terrible, but I love it. I'm not here today to create any pitfalls. But you just don't know who's looking out for you. You just don't know what's going to happen. So I'm standing there about to start my revision, and somebody's mislabeled the tray and opened that great big trap door, and I'm just waiting to fall in it. So don't make this happen. It's not nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you very much for that.
No problems.
So nice. Anybody got any? Do you mind answering?
No, not at all.